Clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
We'll do this over here.
I just got a note from Rep VBI. Snow is flying now. She's trying to depart the snowpocalypse of 2025 so far in Salem, but it is snowing, Reagan, as we record right now. There is no doubt. So I'm staring out the window of our Salem house, and it's coming down pretty good. How about you there in Lynn County?
Yes, Albany. It was coming down pretty hard a little while ago. It has slowed some.
Oh, good.
I went out for a bit this morning. We have four-wheel drive for both of our cars because you need that. And yeah, it was fine. Nothing terrible. An
I'm going
inch,
home
maybe
here in a
two.
little. I'm going to go home in a little bit, and I'll drive up over the pass and head back to Prineville. But I mean, that's why I brought my 2018 F350 with, 37-inch wheels on it, and jacked up 5 inches. So I got my redneck truck, and I got a huge grill guard on the front of it. So if anybody gets in my way, I'll just shove them out of the way and keep going.
Is that a dually, Brian? I heard you have a dually now.
I have a dually too. This one isn't my dually. I brought mine. The dualies don't do good in the snow.
Oh,
And
really?
yeah, they're great for pulling. So I use it for, when I'm pulling equipment around or pulling cows or anything. That's why you want to have the dually. So
Huh.
I did get a dually, but it's not one that I like to have in the snow. I love this truck for the snow. It's my favorite snow machine.
More tires, more problems, I guess.
Yeah, there's
Well,
something in the weight dissipation, how the weight kind of goes with itself and stuff. So it's really designed for pulling, not for getting through mud and snow like my 18 is.
yeah, that's true. But yeah, the snow is here. I love snow. I grew up in Central Oregon, love snow. Drove I drove around in the snow, inches and inches of snow, so this isn't anything
Yeah. No,
surprising. But
my kid went to high school. He went to school this morning. They no delay. It's snowing, been snowing over there. So we're just kind of
yeah.
used to it. I get the valley isn't as used to it. So when it comes, I remember because I grew up in the valley, unlike you. I live over.
Hmm.
Now we switched. Like you grew up over there, and now I live over there, and you live in
That's
the.
right.
So I get it. But I always remember growing up in Sandy and Gresham and stuff that, when we got a snow day, it was pretty cool. It was pretty like fun and new. And it was, that 1 or 2 days a year where, you'd put on your clothes and grab whatever you could to go sledding down some dumb hill in the neighborhood. And it was always a blast as a kid. So hopefully a bunch of kids will put down their stupid cell phones and go grab, some dumb tire from Les Schwab and go sledding or something, So we'll see.
I sent my kids out in the snow this morning.
Yay, it's good for them.
Really, really, my wife got them already. I want to give her the credit. Um, but I think what this does point out a little bit of a, we'll call it a double standard here. Because when it snows in central and eastern Oregon, yeah, just submit your excuse form to the legislature. We'll excuse you, but committees keep going, floor keeps going.
Oh yeah.
Then all of a sudden, when the Portlanders or the Salemers or the Eugeners can't make it into the Capitol, then we're closing the Capitol. So I think that's a little bit, it's probably always going to be that way, but I like to point that out. And,
I think it always has
I
been that way.
everybody yesterday was freaking out about the snow and everything. And so I just decided I took action, Brian. I tweeted that due to inclement weather, I'm closing the Oregon State Capitol tomorrow by executive order. And I tweeted that at 4:29. And then around 5 o'clock, we got emails from, the presiding officers' offices and ledge admin saying that they were going to check. They were leaving the Capitol open. They would check again at 5 a.m. At 5 a.m., the Capitol was still open. At around 7:30 a.m. this morning, they said, actually, we are going to close it because OSP says the roads are getting worse.
Yeah,
So,
right.
so as of now, 9:40 in the morning, the Capitol is closed.
Look at you. I am tweeting right now that you're an unelected bureaucrat and you don't have the
I am an unelected, but I'm not a bureaucrat because I don't have any administrative power, unless you're saying you're counting this, the ability to open and close the Capitol.
Well,
Um,
you are a bureaucrat, I think. I mean, don't you qualify as a bureaucrat?
I think bureaucrats have to be in the executive branch, actually. I don't think you can be a legislative bureaucrat,
Uh,
but now I'm looking up the definition of bureaucrat.
I'm still tweeting it. It didn't change my tweet. I just think it's funny to make reference to, what the Democrats are just railing on Elon Musk about, but he's actually a bureaucrat because he does actually have a job. He is actually an employee, which is
Yeah.
I find that kind of interesting. So he's not just a contractor, and there must be some reasons for that. So he probably has to be an employee to do certain things, and I think that's they're so they are following the law. And speaking of, and Trump, he won a really good court battle too, so that he basically is able to let federal workers take a buyout option. And so that judge, heard the briefs real quick and said, "Yep, yep, no, they're Trump's right. See you later." And I'm sure it won't be the end of more lawsuits and federal judges who, are doing the bidding of left-wing Democrats, in the national stage, just trying to gum up the courts to slow them down. Because that's all this is. It's all just slow it down. However you can do it, whatever means possible, slow down the Trump train, and that's what they're doing. That's really what's
And
back to.
Brian, I mean, I think you and I agree. Republicans would never engage in attempts to slow down any lawmaking processes or anything like that. We wouldn't do
Never,
that,
never. It's
ever.
it's
Um,
abhorrent.
No, I mean, I think we understand sort of, and so you kind of understand where they're coming from in the minority up there, and they're doing
Absolutely.
everything they can to use whatever levers they've got. But it is kind of fascinating to see just how few levers they have available. I mean, I think that's true for us especially in the super minority here, and with the additional limits on the walkout stuff. And you look at Democrats I think in this state, but also in the country, they've spent a lot of time trying to make the executive branch more powerful, giving the executive branch, the bureaucrats are talking about, a lot more authority, giving the governor, the president a lot more authority. And now it's being used against them. And they're like, whoa, we don't like this very much. And so
Yeah.
really the solution is to reduce the power of the executive branch and really get back to three equal branches. But I think a lot of people, and I know that, we went through the Peter Courtney celebration of life, and in those speeches and maybe even in the video, I think he said that the legislature at his time was not treating or looking at itself as an equally with the governor, that the governor was more powerful than them, and that his goal was to make the legislature assert itself to be an equal branch,
Hmm.
equal in authority, actually holding the executive accountable. And I think that the more you do that, the better government you have, even when it feels like, well, we're Democrats and the governor's a Democrat, so shouldn't we all just be able to get along? No, because the executive branch wants as much power as it can have, and the legislature is supposed to be the check on that.
Yes, you're definitely spot on that. I think different states have different laws and rules for executive powers, right? For the governors. So,
Yeah.
our laws are a little bit, I would say, less. The governor has a decent amount of power, but really not unbridled, unchecked power. Like the Texas governor has a lot more power to do things, than our governor. And I think that Peter Courtney was correct that the legislature needs to, even within their own party, stand up a little bit more and just say, well, just because the governor put out her GRB and she says she wants to spend this much on this agency, like that's all she's doing is it's called the governor's recommended budget. So she's saying we got to have a starting point, but you guys, as the legislature, ultimately control the power of the purse. And this is the same way with the federal government, right? So the Congress says we want to spend X number of dollars doing X, right? So and then what they have done is they said, well, instead of us saying we want this million going here, we want this million going exactly there, what they've done is say we're just going to send 2 billion. And Mr. President, you figure it out, right? So what they've done is given the executive more power to control where that money is spent after they've allocated the bulk amount of funds. And I think in our state government, we have a little bit of both, right? So we have a lot of times when we do things like our 100 million appropriations we talked about in 24, where we sent cities direct appropriations from the legislature. And then a lot of times we'll just do programmatic approaches where we'll just send, instead of sending 100 million broken up into 50 projects to 50 different cities, and that takes a lot of work to get that done. Like to get all the details, all the things. So it's easier just to say, we're going to send $100 million to Oregon Housing and tell them to basically appropriate that. And so so you get complete control or you give up that control and then the governor is in charge of OHCS. So really what you're saying is what's the better way to appropriate funds or to have control. And so the more you give to the governor, the more you may not like the outcome. So I think
Exactly.
you have to weigh that. And I think that's what Senator Courtney was really getting after was you may not like the results. So do you want to be an equal branch of government or do you just want to be a pawn for the governor?
Well, and one of the great things about having 90 legislators is they're all focused on different stuff. Maybe you have one, two, three that all care about similar topics, but everybody's working on different topics. We're working on a lot of natural resource stuff
Yeah.
because of natural resource stuff and housing. And that's kind of, mostly it. And then anything that comes up from the district. Somebody else is working on water and somebody else is working on, judiciary and somebody else is working on whatever the topics are. And the governor is only, even as her agency is big and has a lot of things that they are working on, the governor only has a few key priorities. She's focused on housing, she's focused on education, she's focused on homelessness, and then some like behavioral health stuff. And that, I mean, when she talked about her priorities, there was only really those three or four that were there. And then, she'll work on the other stuff as needed. But so if you don't think there should be a lot more housing, which by the way, you're crazy, we're in a housing crisis. But let's just say you don't, then you probably aren't super thrilled that the governor is spending so much money, so much time, so much attention. She spent her entire 2024 session working on only housing. She had one priority bill that entire session, housing. So that's why the legislature exists is to deal with a lot of these other issues, more things than the governor can handle at once, more things because the governors and the president is only going to have a handful of priorities at any one time. You can make a list of 100 priorities, but you're not going to make progress on all of them. every single day. You can change between them, or you can focus on one, two, or three for your entire session, for your entire term.
Yeah, no, I think you're well, and some agencies, I don't want to say some are good or some are bad. I don't think that's really the reality. Is like some agencies that I've been because I've been working a lot with the subcommittees on Ways and Means because Senator Anderson sits on both general government and natural resources, and a lot of stuff comes through those two committees. And as you start to look at their budgets and what they do, you start to understand really the agencies themselves. And some agencies are built for speed and doing things, and some are just built for reporting and just saying here's what's happening in this world, right? And then some have become political advocacy agencies, ODF and W, ODF and W. But I think that there's a few, and that's really what we have to as the legislature is say, hey, this agency is doing a great job of getting, housing dollars out the door. Just use OHCS and just say, hey, they're doing this part really well, but they're not really doing this part really well. And that's the oversight that we have to provide, I think, at the legislative level is to say, really just say when they come in with their budget, say, well, what are you doing well and what are you doing wrong? What are you doing? What's the thing? And also, are you showing up at the office? Because we got to go in every day, except for a snow day like today. And we're come to find out that a lot of them don't show up at the office, Reagan. It seems.
And I mean, one of these ideas, and we just keep talking about this in housing, and actually, Representative Mannix has this bill. I'll see if I can find the number, the Home Start Act.
Mm,
And basically, he just wants every agency to go say, hey, do we have any land that could be turned into housing? And actually, I think, we can do a bill on this, but even if I was the governor, if my number one priority is housing, I would have done an executive order day one.
yeah.
Please look and inventory all of your available lands, everything that's built and everything that hasn't been built. Anything that we don't absolutely need today, sell it for housing. And then if you have lands that are old buildings that need to be redeveloped, because we're talking about redevelopment, we talk about infill, changing, these buildings that are no longer being used for big corporations or big agencies and turning them into apartments and whatnot, the infill, then use them for that and get them out there and just look under every single rock. And I think that that is interesting is what's happening at the federal level. Doge seems to be flipping over every single rock in government, just looking to see
Mhm.
what's there. And I think that approach would be better for Oregon if we're, we have a housing crisis, we have a homelessness crisis, we have these other big problems. Let's look under every rock, transportation, education.
Well, I don't know if Representative Mannix wasn't there in 2021, but actually Representative Anna Williams passed a bill requiring this study to be done on lands. So there is a Department of State Lands has a website so I've already been digging into this, which is they have a Department of State Lands has a website. Like it's a cool interactive tool that shows all of their land and where it's at. And we'll put it in the show notes because it's kind of fascinating to look at your county where you live and like see what public property is owned by who, right? And it doesn't get down to the level that he's probably trying to dig into, which is does an agency have an old crappy building that's sitting there empty that we could level and sell it off for affordable housing or something? And I really think that's
Right.
probably what he's getting at. And I did ask Das yesterday, actually, they were in and we were talking about some work that we're working on a bill. And then I asked her the same question of what DAS buildings, because they own about, what did she tell me? I want to say 90% of the buildings are owned through DAS, so that are state buildings. So they're just because they manage them, they're required to manage.
Yeah.
So and the ones they don't worry about, like ODOT buildings and stuff, like they don't worry about that, right? Equipment shed up on top of the pass or something like that. That's just run by ODOT. So they do run most everything. And she said they have an inventories, I forget the name of it, but it's like an inventories group an executive inventories group that's supposed to be having a report due out here at the end of the month, so that gives us an idea where all their buildings are and if they're in use and what percent of use and things like
Oh,
that.
that's interesting.
I'm hoping, and I think what we're seeing is that a response to the Doge stuff, whether we like to admit it or not, it's probably having an effect on the local stuff because now it's making all of our state agencies and all of our legislators really kind of take a hard look at our budgets again and say, does it hurt for us to look for, ways to save some money? I kind of feel like that doesn't hurt. I don't know why that's a partisan issue. I don't know why. I mean, I know why it is for SEIU and the unions. Like they don't want to lose, they don't want to lose employees because those are union dues going out the door. They don't want that. But I think that it's a responsible government, and so whether you're Democrat or Republican, I feel like you just got to be a little bit more responsible with our tax dollars and find ways to do that. And I think, honestly, I think that Governor Kotek would actually do really well for herself if she actually put out an executive order ordering her agencies to look for things like Kevin Mannix was just talking about. And if they have already done it, why wouldn't she put it out and say, I've already did this and here's the buildings we have, or there's none. Or I mean, show that you're doing something to solve the crisis that you pinned an executive order to. And I think that's probably where a lot of the Republican heartburn comes. And I think we're even seeing a little bit of that frustration within the Democratic side of the aisle as well.
I think that's right. So one of the things I wanted to get to, which we haven't totally covered, is and you put this link in. I actually just clicked on it. I
Yeah.
was looking on Capital Chronicle, but you actually put this link already in there. So this is from this is commentary. It's not technically quote unquote journalism, but Tim Nesbitt, and I just want to read his bio
Isn't
so
it?
people
Isn't it
know.
all? Isn't it all journalism kind of
Oh,
commentary?
and we'll talk about that in a minute because I had a
Okay.
little Twitter feud with
Okay.
Les
Okay.
Zeitz. Um,
Oh.
Tim Nesbitt, a former union leader in Oregon, served as an advisor to Governors Kulongoski and John Kitzhaber, and later helped design Measure 98 in 2016, which provided extra targeted funding for Oregon's high schools. So he's kind of, a teachers union type leader. And he wrote some commentary. Better grad rates, but worse test scores. Befuddle lawmakers, validate reformers. And before even reading the headline, I can tell you exactly what happened. I don't know if Tim gets into this. But do you remember a year ago, 2 years ago, when the State Board of Education decided to vote to reduce the requirements to graduate,
Yes.
basically continue kicking that can down the road?
Oh, I kind of
And then
do.
our graduation rates went up, shockingly. Hmm.
Yeah.
But we had schools closed for a while during COVID. We had a lot of challenges reopening them. We were one of the last states to reopen, and our test scores continue to get worse. Shocking. And
Hmm.
so we'll put this link in the show notes, obviously. I think this is important. But again,
Well, all right. Well,
he
take it a step further, right? I mean, are you done there on that? I don't know. Sorry. I didn't mean to.
the only thing I wanted to say is that I don't have the solution. I mean, I know the general Republican solution is more choices and more accountability, less money in middle management, more money in the classrooms. I think those are all good overarching goals. But I think the real thing that we need to talk about is Mississippi went from last in the nation to middle of the pack and maybe even rising higher than that. I need to go back and check. But I saw a headline. Mississippi was last place in education and they are no longer. So I don't care if you're a Republican, I don't care if you're a Democrat. Let's send the education committee, because what else are they going to pass? Let's send the education committee to Mississippi on a fact-finding mission for a couple of weeks and find out what did you guys do to turn the ship around. And let's not be afraid if the answers are pro-Republican or pro-Democrat or something that we've already tried and failed at. Let's just look at it. And then let's bring as much of that back as we can and work to fix this problem. But it's not a funding problem. We have a per pupil funding much higher than a lot of other states, and we're still doing much worse than a lot of those other states.
Well, and they're not even, and there's another state too, Rhode Island. We could put this one in the show notes too because it's interesting. So maybe they can go to Mississippi and then head up to Rhode Island and stuff. But there was a whole story because their biggest problem was kids just not coming to school right after COVID. And I think the absenteeism is still super, super bad in Oregon. And I think that's a problem that we have to address as well, because the reality is school vouchers, parents who have the ability and you're in a location where you can send your kids to private schools, they're already doing it. So we're already seeing, the public school enrollment is already declining, right? So, and it's declining by people who have the means to send their kids to private school, regardless of Republican or Democrat, by the way, because Janelle Bynum sends her kids to private school. She doesn't send them to public school, and she's a congresswoman and a Democrat. So I think so. People that can, but in Prineville, I don't have a private high school to send my kids to. They'd have to go all the way to Bend. So they're in public school. And I don't want them in public school, but I don't really have much of a choice. So there's unless they want to drive every day to, go to Catholic school in Bend or something, but I don't really want them driving because I'm paying for the gas. So, and I'm an engaged parent. I think my kids are pretty smart, and my wife is waiting to get on a plane, right, to go visit our son in college. So I think that the problem really doesn't lie in school vouchers or the school choice thing, because okay, kids get a choice. Now what? Reagan, like what's the if you're in the Southwest coastal community of Brookings and your school sucks, where are you going to send them? Like you don't have a choice to send them
Right.
anywhere. So it's going to be online education or something like that, which doesn't help. And the social aspects of I'm a true believer in the social aspects of going to high school and middle school, playing school sports, even though OSAA sucks. But playing school sports is super important to kids, and it's really the whole idea of high school is that you want your kids to figure out how to learn. It's not necessarily what they're learning, but they're learning how to learn. They're
Right.
learning where do my next step goes from here. I'm going to learn how to pay attention to a guy that's showing me how to swing a hammer so I know how to build a house, right? We're just teaching them skills that allow them to move on to the next chapter of their life, whatever that chapter might be. And I think that's what we have to refocus on. And the only way to really get kids better, I believe, in education, you got to raise the bar. If I tell my kid he doesn't have to be to school until 10 o'clock every day, guess what? He's going to show up at 9:59 and 59 seconds. If I tell him he's
Correct.
going to show up at 8 o'clock, he's going to show up at 7:59 and 59 seconds. So if we raise the bar, they'll achieve it. And I think we have to stop getting with this DEI mentality of, and I don't even know if it's a DEI mentality, but it's just mentality like, well, if we just lowered the bar, more would graduate. And I'm like, well, for a little bit, you see those increases. And then what's going to happen is, I bet if we stay the course and throw more money at it, what we're going to see is now all of a sudden the graduation rates, even with the lowering the bar, are going to start dropping again. That's my thought on it. And so we have to raise the bar. We have to raise the standards. We have to have better teachers. We got to get rid of some freaking stupid administrators that do nothing. They're like middle management in a company. There's no point for them. Like get those people out of the way. Give our school boards the empowerment they need to build the education standards they want for their community and get out of their way. Because I think that's part of the problem. Then I think we'll see a renaissance in public education. And I think if you go look at Mississippi and some of Rhode Island stuff, Reagan, to your point, I think that's what they did. Don't quote me on it, but I know the Rhode Island piece, that was the biggest part, is giving those local schools and principals the ability to go after the truancy of minors.
There it is. We got the education committees, Rhode Island, blue state, Mississippi, red state, and just follow up. They've received their highest ever ranking on education, and they got to 30th. And frankly, I think right now a lot of people in Oregon would be happy with 30th. So that would be huge for us.
Jump up and
That would be
down if we
a
made
20
30th.
spot jump. So now we have a bipartisan fact finding mission. We're going to a red state, we're going to a blue state.
It'd be like us going to the border. This time we can go to of course, neither one of our bosses are on education, but I know they're both passionate about
Yeah.
education and I think I think everybody in that building is passionate about education. The reason why nobody wants to serve on the education committee is that committee becomes a lightning rod between the left and the right. And I think that it's not a fun committee to be on because you get, these bills that come through there that create lightning rods, and then your inbox is flooded with people, and you got these, groups that just are on both sides, right? That are just pushing for an agenda that it's not fun to be in the middle of.
So, one of the other things we want to talk about today, just really briefly, I think everybody's pretty aware that President Trump renamed through executive order the Gulf of Mexico to be the Gulf of America. And a lot of people are saying that this is actually DEI because he took something that just belonged to Mexico and is now distributing it equally to all three of Central, South, and North America.
I didn't think
So,
about that.
yeah, I thought that was funny. I saw that on Instagram Reels. But so one of the things they did with that is so Google Maps has changed their maps to say Gulf of America. If you're in the United States, you see Gulf of America. If you're out of the United States, you either see both or you see Gulf of Mexico. Because Trump's executive order is only in force in the United States, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And Apple, a couple days later, has now done the same thing. So now Apple displays the Gulf of America in the
It's
United
so
States as
awesome.
well. The Associated Press got a little upset because they say today we were informed by the White House that if the AP did not align its editorial standards with President Donald Trump's executive order renaming Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America, AP would be barred from accessing an event in the Oval Office. This afternoon, AP's reporter was blocked from attending an executive order signing, implying that they did not follow the executive order. It is alarming that the Trump administration would punish AP for its independent journalism. Limiting our access to the Oval Office based on content of AP's speech not only severely impedes public access to independent news, it plainly violates the First Amendment. So that's their viewpoint.
Yeah.
Les Zeitz, who is the Malheur Enterprise and Salem Reporter, like editor in chief, and a longtime journalist in Oregon. I don't
Started the Capitol
um,
Chronicle.
started the Capitol Chronicle. He says in a tweet, the not so subtle control of the press by the government is something no citizen should want. When government tells the media what to report, the First Amendment is in deep jeopardy, not for journalists, but for the people. So I think his viewpoint on this is a little bit different. But if Trump renames via executive order and it's a legal executive order, then that's just what the law of the land is. Executive orders do have the force of law anywhere that they are applicable, right? He can't change every law with an executive order, but he can rename in government map databases the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. That's a thing he can do. And
Sure.
that's why Google and Apple are changing their names because they use government databases. And the government database now says this, so our maps now say this. Okay. I replied. I probably
I
shouldn't
couldn't
have.
help yourself.
I said the executive order is in force in the United States of America, where the Associated Press is reporting from. Why don't they want to follow the order? Surely the First Amendment. So that was the first piece. Second piece. Surely the First Amendment doesn't require the AP to have access to the Oval Office. I looked, it's not in there. I said, and then I said, why are journalists so soft these days? Because remember
Well,
that government and journalists are typically at odds, okay? But they're complaining about access to one particular event in the Oval Office. I don't understand why they're not saying, we have our standards and we're not going to compromise on those standards, and so we don't need to be in the Oval Office then if the president doesn't want us there. And then Les replies to me, at least you're on record as apparently supporting government control of the press. Follow the order is not anywhere in the First Amendment. But then why let the Constitution get in the way? I don't understand his point here. Yeah, of course it's not in the First Amendment because the First Amendment deals with free speech. It's Article 1, or maybe it's Article 2, deals with the executive branch. Okay, so, and the executive branch does have some authority to enforce the laws of the land, and that does include now, based on, you won't see executive orders really in the Constitution. That is something that he can do based on an interpretation of the Constitution via the courts, right? So those things, the case law basically makes it so that he can do executive orders. I would argue you don't really see those in the Constitution itself. but you do see that he does get to discharge the duties of the executive branch. Okay. And that's my whole point is Trump is so far, they didn't file a lawsuit on this, you notice. Okay. Because I do think that it's all within his authority. Sure, you don't like it. But again, the kind of complaining about the government's not telling them what to print. The government is saying this is what the maps now say,
Yeah.
and you're choosing to ignore what the maps now say. I mean, they are actually almost intentionally ignoring the facts, and I think it's just to be a pill about it. And again, that's fine,
Well, they
but
politically disagree. I mean, that's the
that
reality.
again,
Yeah.
right? So
I
I thought
think,
that was an
well,
entertaining exchange.
and I think the point, I mean, the Biden didn't let people into the, into the press room. I mean, there was lots of people that would apply because you can always apply to be certified press to go into the press room, right? And when Trump said, hey, I'm going to open it up for people and let podcasts in there, right? And there was like 10,000 applications for people to, have podcasts in there and stuff. But Biden had that thing locked down. I mean, there was people he had to let in there, like Fox News and stuff, because they would just hammer him, right? But I think the AP, I mean, who gives them the right because they're the Associated Press to have in their mind have any more rights than than Breitbart or these other groups that are out there that are considered right wing or left wing. And I clearly see the AP and their writers and their storylines are always left bent. It's just the way they are, the way they've become. And that's why PBS, got rid of DEI because they don't want to lose their funding. That's what it comes down to with them, right? They said, "Oh, PBS just dumped it because they know the federal government funds PBS." I still think they should cut all the funding to public broadcasting because I think it's just stupid. But and this is Les Zeitz would agree, which is kind of funny about Les is he'll agree that newspapers shouldn't get. He's a big proponent of taking away all the public notices that governments have to put into newspapers and open it up to everybody that runs a newspaper, including his own, that's maybe online newspapers. So, I think we all want laws that make what we perceive our life to be better and our own political perception of it. And what you're getting after with him is the true, like, what does the Constitution say? And he's kind of bringing you political arguments. And I think that's where you guys probably went or off on each other. That's the
And
way.
I think that's what I was confused about because Les is one of those classic journalists, I think, that in years past probably wouldn't go like this, but Trump has so warped a lot of people's viewpoints they can't see past. You
Yeah.
know, if Trump demands they do something, they have to go figure out how it's inaccurate or wrong so that they can say it's unconstitutional so they don't have to listen. Like it's just
Yeah, they just
sometimes he's
hate
going to
him
be
so much that
correct.
it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd
All
be
right,
like
Brian, anything?
if Greg Smith, if Representative Greg Smith had an incredible idea, I bet Les Zeitz would find a way to write something bad about it.
I think we need to get Representative Smith on the podcast. I know you're working on lining up some legislators, and I think we're hoping to do that here soon
Yeah.
to
I
get
know
some more.
Representative Javity. I was going to have him join us this morning, but he was on our coastal caucus call and he was in his car trying to drive to the Capitol before they closed it. And so he wants to come on and talk. He's got some priority stuff that he wants to discuss, and that's kind of is a good way to lead us to our kind of our final stuff about the Oregon thing, right? Is that kind of where you were going next?
Yeah, well, I forgot to send. Sounds like I forgot to send Representative Javity my executive order, so apologies to him for not getting that out there. It was a little difficult to kind of get the press to print that. There's a lot of things about the legislative session that they aren't printing these days. I don't know if they just don't have the time, or maybe they got their federal funding cut. I'm not really sure, but
Don't you
um,
don't you think though that the committees like so far they're just kind of boring?
okay. So I want to give Democrats some credit here, Brian.
All
Tell me if
right.
you disagree, but I would say we're now February 13th. Is this officially a month into session? I need to go back and look at my calendar to see when we
Technically,
started.
but really the first week was organizing, so we're like 3 weeks into session.
Okay, so but for 3 straight weeks, I have heard a lot of Republican bills getting hearings. I've heard of just in every committee, all over. Republicans are busy; they're getting their bills heard. Now, I still think most of these bills are dead, but I'm kind of impressed that they were able to do the bipartisanship this long. And I do think there must be some sort of concerted effort from leadership or from the committee chairs to be more bipartisan. And I do think that that deserves some credit. And then I think, if we can sustain that, I think obviously we'll have a more positive session. But really, I'm pretty impressed at the level. I mean, we're still hearing getting bills heard next week and the week after that. And that was not the case in my memory 2 years ago.
No, I think that's a fair assessment there. I do have it on good authority that I think there was a directive that came down to, tell the committee chairs, hey, listen, like, hear the bills. Like that's your job, right? And well, not all committees. We can say there's a few that are, I think,
Sure, sure. There's always
not
going to be a
exactly
few.
still playing by the rules, but they're the same ones that didn't care 2 years ago, right? But I think we're seeing, at least I'm seeing with Senator Anderson's committees, that his committee chairs have been really, quite frankly, great to work with so far, and I think they should be commended for that. I think that their job is now they may disagree on the actual policy we're proposing, but you have
Right.
to you have to give somebody a chance, right? And some of the
Have the debate.
yeah, yeah, and some of the hearings, geez, I think even Senator Anderson's been a little bit more critical of even Republican bills coming through his committee than Democrat bills, because he's going to be critical regardless. Like he wants good ideas, and I think that's a fair assessment to have. And the one negative I will say regarding committee stuff is I feel like there's not a lot of when they do have a hearing and our Republican friends have a hearing, I I don't feel like they're prepared. I feel like some of them are they don't have other people coming in to testify. They're not bringing a slideshow. They're not really, it's almost like and probably to support them a little bit, they're like, "Oh, what? I got a hearing next week? You're giving me a
Right.
hearing?" And so they're scrambling to try to figure out what to do when they got a hearing because we're not used to having them. So
I was gonna say, do Republicans even know how to put together a support panel for a hearing? I don't know.
so there's a little bit of that, but I do like the tenor and the tone of session. I do enjoy that part of it. I had a great time last night. Senator Anderson's he's co-chair of the Arts and Culture Caucus, and they had their kickoff event last night at the theater there in Salem, and it was sadly it was mostly Democrats legislators. Like Republicans just chose not to show up. And I just find that kind of odd because why? Why wouldn't you show up to that? I know that they're asking for money like every other group out there, but I don't know why you wouldn't want to show up because there wasn't really competing after hours events last night. And maybe and to be fair, a lot of them I think went home yesterday because they knew the snowpocalypse was coming today. So I think a few of them
Yeah.
ran out of here. But I think I think you have to support them. If you want them to support you, you got to support them. And that doesn't mean you have to support their bills. It means that you have to show up and say hi and listen to what they got to say, right? And I thought it was a good I thought it was a good event. They brought on some performers and they were great. Like they did some fun stuff and the Native Americans did kind of a cool little intro music thing and then there was a hey, do you want to hear some of it? I recorded. Let's see if we can do this over Zoom.
If not, we can always clip it in.
I'll put that and I'll drop that in as we're coming back from. I'll drop it in there and then you guys can hear it. I thought that was it was actually pretty cool. The Native American stuff, I feel it's almost more visual than just audio. And then there was another guy that came from Fossil, Oregon, and he was great. He's called Buffalo Kin, And even Rep Nose was sitting behind me, and of course he's fairly loud. I don't know if you know this about Rep Nose, but he's kind of a little, and then Senator Meek was sitting in front of me, and this guy was playing a couple different guitars, and it was just amazing. So you'll hear that now.
If a house catches fire, ain't no woman. The house catches fire, ain't no woman.
And then it was great. So, but Rep Nose was behind me, like, oh my God. And he was like, Vicky was up in the rafters sitting with, I think, Speaker Fahey or something. And she's like, I think we both heard Rep Nose down there.
So who was the organization that put this on, Brian? I was doing some Googling.
The Arts and Culture Caucus.
Okay. So there's a group called the Cultural Advocacy Coalition of Oregon, CACO. And
Hmm.
I think I was trying to remember because we used to have a lot more Republicans involved in the arts. And I remember this from Drazen's resume before she ran the first time. This was actually something that she did. So I found a press release from 2013, and she's the contact as the executive director of the Cultural Advocacy Coalition. And just
Oh,
listen to
really?
like the board they elected. Neil Bryant as the president, Carrie Timchuk as the vice president. And so you have some of these, and I think there's a few more. Obviously, there's some Democrats too, and others, but Republicans involved in the arts. That is, um, something that we need to make sure that there's, my thing and the way I've talked about bipartisanship is it's not having a meeting with Republicans. It's Republicans in every meeting,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's we have to have a Republican at every table. There should be a Republican at every table, and then Democrats should give us the invite if they are hosting it, or if the group is hosting it, they should send out the invite and try to recruit one. And then if we reject it, then it's on us for not being there, right?
And I think, well, and
But
that's why Senator Anderson's on it because he's on the coast, and the coast has a lot of, there's a lot of arts and culture out there, right?
a ton.
From the glass blowing stuff that happens that's considered art to all the other things that happen on the coast, and also the people, right, his constituents are artsy fartsies types, right? So which but what's great about those two is you got Representative Nose, who's from Portland, and then you got Senator Anderson, who's from the coast, and so their push and pull is really like I think rural versus urban kind of stuff, and they've been able to find a good spot in which they agree most of the time, and they're not asking for a bunch of money. I think it really wasn't that much. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, I would love to see Republicans be more engaged in arts. I would love to see arts in schools more important. I think there's a lot of value because whether you're a country music singer and you're a Republican and you love all of that sort of stuff, well, that's guess what? That's art, and culture. So I just kind of think, and I like artists. I love statues. I love the bronze statue work stuff. I think all that stuff is just cool stuff. And Oregon's got a rich history of that. And to your point, Republicans were very involved in it before, and it feels like they kind of moved away because they think somehow or another it's political, and it's just
Well, I don't think even just that. I think it's that it follows the high income type folks that are becoming more and more Democrats that used to be Republicans and now we're more working class. And the working class tends to involve a lot less art because art is kind of, it has the idea of being a rich person's game. And of course, a lot of it is freely available and anyone can go see it, right? But it has that kind of, I don't know, hoity-toity feel
yeah,
to it. I mean, there's more galleries on the
that's a
coast
technical term. What are you
Yes, hoity-toity.
talking?
There's more galleries on the coast than like
Yeah, oh
available
yeah,
housing at this point, right? You've got first vacation rentals. There's obviously the most of those, and then there's galleries, and then there's houses for sale you can live in. That's
yeah,
the order, Brian,
yeah.
on the coast.
Well, and in rural towns, I mean, if you look at like culture and that sort of stuff, and like these little galleries and stuff, and rural towns, like they're the ones kind of, doing remodels of old buildings and turn them into, fun little metal art galleries or something like that. And I mean, antiques is kind of an art form on some level, right? I mean, so those antique shops and stuff that are up and down around the coast and all throughout, eastern rural Oregon. And I just think that stuff's really neat, and we need to embrace that. I think it's because history is involved in that arts and culture. And for me, I'm a big historical fan, and I love writing about and thinking about the history of Oregon and people coming over, on wagon trains and how communities were built, right? That sort of stuff super interests me. And so, and I actually like different stuff. There was some other people that came out and did some singing that's not really my cup of tea. I mean, even I forget the lady's name that was kind of like the keynote, but she does kind of a jazz band kind of thing. And and she was great. Like, it's not my type of music, but she was awesome. Like, I could go listen to a whole concert for her. So I got exposed to something that a jazz band that music that I probably would have never really went to, but I thought she was great. And I think there was one clunker in there, but we won't say who it is. They were doing like new age kind of music stuff, and he was like trying to play a flute, and he plugged his phone in, and it really didn't come off very well, but but that's okay. Not everything works, right? But for the most part, if you're batting 90%, I think you're doing pretty well.
Well, I think this is a good place to leave it, Brian.
Yep.
I think next week we'll hear some movement, do some reading. I'll put the link in the show notes about the wildfire maps and some of the negative feedback Senator Golden has been getting on that front. I think we'll see some movement by next week on that.
Yeah, good.
And I think that's going to be good for Oregonians, good for everybody. Lots of good stuff in the hopper, but we can't talk about all of it just yet. Some of it is, top
Tease.
secret.
He's teasing.
We're getting documents that say not for distribution, right, Brian? We're still in that kind of phase of this, but soon, very soon, we'll be able to talk about it, I think.
That'll be good. Thanks, Reagan.
Thanks, Brian.